Welcome to Houston Sports Talk with your host, Robert Land.
Thanks for checking into the best Houston sports podcast, part of the National Bleav Network, presented by FanDuel. And you're going to love today's guest. In just a couple of minutes, I've got the author of a new book about one of the great what-if Astros teams of all time. It was loaded with all-star talent, tragic stories, and behind-the-scenes drama. Before we hear from him, let's talk a little current Astros drama. There was a little Astros fan frustration with how little Dana Brown got in the Mauricio Dubon trade. But trust me, I will not try to sell you on middle infielder Nick Allen. Even if he's a great defensive player, which we know he is, he's a terrible offensive player with no history or hope of real potential to improve a borderline 26-man roster player who's more Zach Short than Mauricio Dubon. What we don't know is the market for a utility player, which is really all Dubon is. You know, he makes $6 million. And for a utility player, that's a lot. Could Dana have gotten a prospect with any potential? Maybe, maybe not. This deal can only be judged by one factor. What kind of pitching can Dana get with the money that he saved on Dubon? Astros fans, you got to be patient and see how this offseason plays out. I know the easy thing is we don't like Dana. We hate everything Dana does. I don't know what's kind of behind all this, but I'm not in that camp at all. If Brown is keeping Paredes and Walker, then the infield depth is there. You know, you've got extra infielders with Paredes and Walker because Correa and Pena can both play short. Paredes and Correa can both play third. Walker and Paredes can both play first. The one question mark is Altuve's back up at second. Is Nick Allen the guy? I don't know, but you know, that's the real only question mark that you've got among the backups. The outfield candidates, you know, you got tons, and some of those guys can play various positions. The outfield candidates, of course, Cam Smith, Jake Meyers, Zach DeCenzo, Zach Cole, Jacob Melton, Taylor Trammell, and the occasional Jordan, who I assume should be playing some left field with Altuve playing some DH. We'll see if Meyers gets dealt. Huge concerns about handing over center field to Jacob Melton, whose hitting is a major question mark, or Zach Cole, whose defense is my biggest concern. But maybe between the two, you can make up for Jake Meyers. New hitting coach Victor Rodriguez's specialty is improving contact. Cole and Melton's biggest weakness is contact. So maybe he can improve their upside. Rodriguez, if you didn't hear it, that's the new guy as your hitting coach. Now, for you Rockets junkies, I've got an analyst joining me tomorrow, a veteran of the Houston sports radio market. Haven't had him on the show. So I think you're going to enjoy that one. And for you Texans junkies, I've got a Colts insider to preview the huge AFC South tilt this Sunday. Our friends at FanDuel favor the Colts by 4.5 points coming off their loss against the Chiefs. With Stroud returning and the way the Texans D is playing, man, I'm leaning towards the Texans here. Even if the Texans lose, it's hard to believe they're not going to cover. The games are always close with the Texans. It always seems like it's coming down to a field goal or just a few points. It's one score games, and you know the odds that it's a 4.5. I don't know about that. So I'm leaning Texans, even if they can't win this one. This game should be decided by a field goal, most likely. So we'll see. What do you guys think? Will the Texans cover, or do they win outright? Of course, don't forget we've got our usual Texans post-game show. It'll be 9 p.m. on Sunday after the Colts game. The usuals, Jason Braddock, Tom Chavarria, join me for that one. We always have a blast. You can always, if you miss them live, you can always go to the live tab. You can find our live post games there. Go back to the last one that we just did after the Bills game Thursday night. Very worth checking out. Jump in the comments with your thoughts on the Texans or this Dubon trade. Can't wait to hear about this new Astros book too. I've read it. You're going to love the book. So without further ado, let's hear from the author. Enjoy, guys. We welcome in author Samuel Barrett, who wrote Orange Crush, the neglected 1971 Houston Astros. Great to have you, Samuel. And I got to say, you couldn't have picked a cooler year to set the book because, hey, that was the year I was born. So that's pretty fun. And what strikes me is you were born 29 years later. So what ignites the passion for you to do a book on this particular team?
First of all, it's great to be here. Great to have my work honored in a way like this. A lot of it starts with my my family, particularly my father's side of the family, they originate from South Texas, with my paternal grandfather being born in Giddings, Texas, and him serving in the Air Force out of Randolph Air Force Base for a while, and then my father being born in 1966 in San Antonio, and they lived in Texas City for a while till 1975. Then they moved around a lot, and we ended up in Alabama where we are now. But it starts with them. Of course, ever since then, my father's still kept the Astros as his preferred Major League Baseball team. And in 2015, I did the same. And so I kind of started watching the Astros right on time, because in 2015, that's when the Astros really started the really good run that they've been on for the last good while. When it comes to the study of this era itself, around 2020, when there wasn't a whole lot of baseball going on, I began to dive more into baseball history, because that's what I had time for. Got into some Astros history too, that being in the 1960s. That's when they formed as a franchise. Here and there, people say, well, the Astros, they had a 500 ball club. We know about the core of Jimmy Wynn, Joe Morgan, Bob Watson, Doug Rader, Larry Dierker, and Don Wilson. And then people often talk about the players that were traded or got away too soon: Rusty Staub, Mike Cuellar, Dave Justy, Jerry Grody, Sonny Jackson, and there's a few more too. And they say, oh, if this guy had been on the team during the late 60s and early 70s, then the team could have been better. Or imagine the Astros with this guy or that guy. And they'll ask these questions, say, oh, I wonder how much better the Astros would have been. But I guess just something that bothered me, I never got an answer to the question. I was like, okay, well, how much better? What could have actually happened? And I never really found a resource that really went in depth into everything that went right with the organization, everything that went wrong, and how it could have been right, and then seeing what could have been had these players stuck around, had some organizational management taken some different approaches, or had some different people in different positions and places. So that's what I set out to do. I forget who said it, but there's a quote: if there's a book out there you want to read and it's not out there, then you must write it. And that's pretty much what this is. So I did a little bit of the background of 1965 to 1970, then go month by month for the 1971 season. And then the back of the book is revisiting the roster and exploring the what could have been with how the roster could have formed. And then taking that roster and plugging it into whatifsports.com and simulating the postseason had the Astros made it to that point. I was curious for information that wasn't out there, so I just decided to create it myself.
Yeah, we're going to get to some of the stuff that you were mentioning, but you kind of went through some of the talent that wandered through the Astrodome clubhouse in 71. I'm going to repeat those names because it's like an Astros Hall of Fame list. Joe Morgan, Larry Dierker, J.R. Richard, Bob Watson, Jimmy Wynn, Don Wilson, Ken Forsch, Cesar Cedeno, so many guys from that time period. And I'm not sure that my math is right on this, Samuel, but I added up the accolades on this team. I counted 33 All-Star appearances, 21 Gold Gloves, 2 MVPs, and even though not all of them were in their prime, were there just super high expectations considering the amount of talent that was on this team?
The talent really began to come into what it could have been in the late 60s, maybe 1967 to 69. You saw a lot of individual performances. Like in 1967, the Astros had 3 All-Stars: Jimmy Wynn, Rusty Staub, and Mike Cuellar. And they all did really well in the All-Star game in Anaheim that year. And then in 1969, Larry Dierker wins 20 games. Jimmy Wynn hits over 30 home runs again, gets walked more than anybody else on the Astros for sure. But the expectations didn't come until really the mass exodus of talent that came really in the late 60s. I mean, in the early 70s, yeah, that's when the Joe Morgan trade happened, and it's when John Mayberry was traded away too. But by then, a lot of the guys who made up the core alongside those two folks had already been traded away as well. The expectations came in 1970, when in 1969, the Astros on September 10th, after they finished the game on September 10th, the Astros were 2 games out of first place, the closest the franchise had ever been to first place that late in the season. And so they were a contender. You know, in 1969, if people talk about that pennant race in the National League West, they often bring up the Braves, Giants, Dodgers, and Reds. They don't always bring up the Astros. There was a 5th team there. It was Houston. It didn't happen for the Astros. They lost a bunch of games after that September 10th game. But since the team had done well. They finished 81-81, finishing at 500 for the first time in franchise history. Going into 1970, then the city and the fans had expectations. All right, now the team will finish over 500. Now the team will win the division. Now fill in the blank. And so the higher expectations came, ironically enough, after some of the core had already been gutted. So yeah, it's I guess it's kind of interesting to think that even though the team was still good, and a lot of people think the team could have still met the expectations, it would have been a lot easier had the expectations come with that half of the core that had been traded away still kept around.
Yeah, with all the all-stars that the Astros had on that roster that year, Dierker and Don Wilson, the only Astros that were all-stars in 71. Dirk was injured, so Wilson was the only one who played in the all-star game. Now, one story that is going to shock younger Astros fans, Samuel, is during the offseason prior to 71, Jimmy Wynn's wife stabs him in the stomach. And I'm just reading that going, can you imagine that story breaking today? If that happened to Jordan or Altuve, holy cow, you know?
I mean, I don't know if I could find anything to compare it to. I mean, now if a player, you know, you have a couple players that get in trouble for domestic violence against a spouse or somebody like that, and, you know, if it happening to a player, it would be as big of a story. And I don't know how many headlines that caught around the time that happened in December of 1970. But I know reading Jimmy Wynn's book that the mental and emotional impact that had really is what resulted in him having the worst season of his career in 1971.
Tell everybody a little bit about the new visual look the Astros had that season, because it was pretty much the theme for the Astros for the next 23 years.
That's kind of where I got the title of the book from, Orange Crush, is when the team started in 1971. They played the first two series of the season in the Astrodome at home. They won 2 of 3 games against the Dodgers and then 3 or 4 games against the Chicago Cubs. And so the team had a fast start with a 5-2 record, and the fans started referring to the team as the Orange Crush. The one reason being because of the fast start, but another reason was because the Astros in 1971 became the first team in Major League Baseball history to use the color orange as their predominant uniform accent color. What I mean by this is, if you look at Larry Dierker and Joe Morgan right there, the hat is orange, the undershirt sleeves are orange, the socks are orange, the lettering is orange, the stars are orange. It's predominantly orange. Before, from 1965 to 1970, those things were navy. They were navy blue. A navy blue hat, about the same hat that the Astros have today. You know, it's the shooting star look that a lot of people know of. Whereas in 1971, the colors were just flipped. That's pretty much all that happened. It was flipped. And so that created a visual identity that no team had in baseball. There were other teams that had navy. The Braves had a navy look. The Los Angeles Angels at the time had a navy look. The Yankees, of course, Minnesota Twins. Whereas the Astros, they were the only team with orange. And the only other close comparisons would be teams that were red, like the Reds, Phillies, and Cardinals. But even then, orange just, you know, shine brighter. To me, that's a big part of the season because, again, as you said, for the next 23 years, orange was a big part of the Astros' identity. I mean, even in that song, Go Go Astros, there's a verse in there that says, breathe in orange and white. Orange just became the color of the Astros, even more so than it has been for the Orioles, the Mets, the Tigers, and the Giants. Orange has been important to those teams, but not as important as the Astros.
I loved the orange because you said it separated the Astros from everybody else. And then they changed colors in the 90s. And once it hit red, it was just everybody's red. So when you're flipping on the Astros game, is this the Astros? Is this the Reds? Is this, you know, you go through all the teams that it could be, but orange really separated the Astros. So, yeah, I just thought that was a real key part of what you were talking about in the book. And while Harry Walker was the manager in 1971, his 4th year as the Astros manager, and as a player, he had won a couple of championships and a batting title with the Cardinals in the 40s, Samuel. What kind of manager was Harry Walker?
It really kind of depends on the player, what position they were, and also evidently what skin color the player was. This was an era that was just coming off of the Civil Rights Act being passed. The ink was almost dry, but not quite. And Harry Walker, he was Dixie Walker's younger brother. Dixie Walker was a guy who signed the petition in 1947 with the Brooklyn Dodgers to not have Jackie Robinson play on the team. So Harry Walker took some of that with him as a manager. Walker having won a batting title, as you said, and then he also helped Matty Alou win a batting title. When Walker was the manager of the Pirates in the mid-'60s, in 1966, Matty Alou won a batting title. So Walker felt like his batting style was the way, that style being what the players refer to as popping glide, hitting off the front foot, not a lot of power. And when you got a team like the Astros that had some power guys, Jimmy Wynn, Joe Morgan, Rusty Staub for a little bit, Doug Rader even, Bob Watson, there were guys that could put the ball over the fence, albeit being tougher in the Astrodome, but guys who could do it. That just wasn't conducive to a lot of the Astros players. Walker was a really close-minded in that way. He wanted everybody to use his batting style as well as his bat model, his model that didn't have a knob on the end of it. It was just flat. And it felt like if any player didn't do that, then he'd break the bat that they had, like he did to Jesus Alou, and he would not play them as much. So it really got to a point where in the clubhouse there was a lot of rift against Harry. Now, if we're talking about the clubhouse, I'll clarify, the clubhouse chemistry between the players was very good. This was a very close-knit clubhouse. There were a lot of characters, Doug Rader, Norm Miller, George Culver, Fred Gladding, all guys that were good characters, and everybody was loose. They all had fun, and I think that's been the case for a lot of Astros history. I mean, and George Culver and Scipio Spinks told me there would be nights where they'd have 10 guys, maybe even 20 guys. They'd all go out to eat or go to a bar or whatever it may be. This is a close-knit team. And so it's possible a lot of the wins that they had were because they stuck together and won in spite of Harry. I mean, in the infamous book, Ball 4 by Jim Bouton, he quotes Johnny Edwards as saying, "We can finish 10 games ahead of Harry in 1969. I mean, Norm Miller just put it flatly. He just told me that Harry Walker was the worst guy to ever manage a baseball team.
Wow. And that's, after we've watched the Astros have some great managers with AJ Hinch and Dusty Baker, Joe Espada right now. I mean, just a lot of great Astros managers recently. You sort of take it for granted how good some of those guys have been, not only as strategists, but with the clubhouses and all that sort of stuff. Now, one of the cool things that happened in 1971 was this historic Astros moment. And let's go and listen to this from July the 16th, one of the real high points of the season for this Astros team.
Dillingham has won one of his last 8 starts inside here in the Astrodome. The 2-2 pitch. Hit hard to the shortstop, fielded there by Metzger. He goes to the bag and throws on to first base. Now going over to third is Boswell. It's a triple play. Roger Metzger took that hard ground ball by Cleon Jones, raced to the bag to step on second base, fired over to first base for what appeared to be a double play, and Boswell took off for third base, and the throw from first base by Menchie over to Rader at third got him going in there for a triple play.
Yep, it's the first Astros triple play in their history. Got to thank This Day in Baseball's YouTube channel for posting the audio. But Samuel, not really a surprise that Doug Rader was a part of it, because he had won a Gold Glove that season, but part of a 5-year run of Gold Gloves for Rader.
Yep, he was the first Houston player to ever win the Gold Glove Award. And, of course, 1970 being the first season, and then won 4 additional ones, 1970 through 1974. Rader, his defense was definitely his trademark on the field. And being able to do that on an AstroTurf field, which was still new, so we was still trying to kind of being sized up by the players, being able to do that there, I think, if I remember correctly, I think the book Deep in the Heart by Mike Acosta and Bill Brown. Infield coach Salty Parker would hit fungos or throw balls to Rader, and Rader would take his glove off and put his hands behind his back, I think, and would just try to block up the balls with his chest. And so that's what got him to not be afraid of the ball and just go after the ball, get it. And he had great reflexes, a good arm at third base, which is always helpful. And then Rader, he had a lot of power, too. He could put the ball over the fence. It was just his contact hitting ability to put bat on ball and pitch selectivity. That was just kind of the one missing thing that Rader was missing for him to become a true all-around player. In 1970, he did have a lot of that. His batting average was over 250, and that ended up being his career year. But yeah, definitely, if you're talking about the first triple play in franchise history, as well as the second one in franchise history later on in the year in September of 1971, Rader was involved in both of those. And so that's obviously, I think that's kind of telling of Rader's defensive importance to this Houston ball club.
All right, before we move on, did any of you listeners out there remember the 71 Astros? Let me know in the YouTube comments. And if you love this conversation, you got to go to our Astros Memories playlist. Check out our interviews with Tal Smith, Jimmy Wynn, Bob Aspermani, J.R. Richard, Scipio Spinks, and our tribute to Dennis Menke. So a lot of those old Astros in the Astros Memories playlist. There are also tributes to Bagwell, Biggio, and Nolan, which include interviews from their teammates and Astros journalists. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube with notifications so you can get updates on the live content that we do, but also every time we post something. Also subscribe on your favorite podcast app. All right, Samuel, you mentioned there was an old timers game before a Saturday game in 1971. The players you mentioned include Stan Musial and Joe DiMaggio. So Samuel, number one, that means DiMaggio and Musial actually played baseball in the Astrodome, which is kind of wild. Number two, I believe the last old timers game in Houston was 1990 with the Yankees. You just mentioned Mike Acosta. I asked him, when was the last time? Because I had forgotten that this was even a tradition at some point, but I'm kind of sad the tradition is gone.
Since I was born in 2000, I don't know if I've ever heard of an old timers game being, before a regular game in any of my time watching baseball. But when I found out about the old timers gigs, I think the Astros were involved in two. I think there was one in Houston. There may have been one in Atlanta during a series that the Astros were playing against the Braves. But, in finding things like that, as well as other details, I did a lot of research on particularly newspapers.com. Sometimes people ask, how long does it take to write a book like this? Well, I told them I wrote the rough draft of this thing, and this thing's 200 pages. If you count the citations, it's 215 pages or so. I wrote the initial rough draft of this thing in a month because I actually bought a 1-month newspapers.com subscription and basically typed in every day and had a keyword Astros and looked at not only the box scores, but the write-ups, the actual articles that give you details that you can't find in a box score. And that's the stuff that I think is interesting. And I know I'm not alone in that fact. Other people have said that too. And so finding information like old timers games, finding information like Larry Dierker having worn the same shoes, for most of the season in 1971, wearing a hole through the toe or the heel or the sole. That stuff, I wouldn't have been able to find that in a box score. There being a protest in San Diego on Ivan Murrell's of the Padres bat because it had a cup at the end of it. Now, today, a cup is somewhat standard on bats. It's an option that players have, but it wasn't as commonplace back then. Things like that are really what made this research project fun. And I think things like that add a lot of detail to the book itself. I think things like that are really going to make the book stand out in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's funny. Joe DiMaggio was mentioned because I've been to one old timers game in my entire life, and it was back in 1998 at Yankee Stadium. My first trip to Yankee Stadium, the first game that I saw there, and I'm walking off the subway towards the stadium a couple hours before the game, and I see a guy walking up to the stadium, old man, and he's got a couple of guys that I start to realize, oh, these guys look a little bit like bodyguards. And then I spot the profile, and it's unmistakable because it's Joe DiMaggio walking into Yankee Stadium. The first time I'm walking up, I see Joe DiMaggio walking into Yankee Stadium. I don't necessarily miss the old timers game because of the guys playing, because sometimes that's a little sad to see these older guys playing, although there's video that people might have seen on YouTube of like Luke Appling in his 70s hitting a home run at an old timers game, which is kind of remarkable. I want to say that was back in the 1980s or so, but just having those guys around. Of course, now we've got the Astros Hall of Fame ceremony where they do a lot of that. But getting back to the 71 team, one of the key guys, J.R. Richard, made his debut September 5th of 1971. Didn't get to pitch a lot that season, But how did he do in that first game, Sam? Because that was one of the amazing things about talking to J.R. Richard when I talked to him a few years ago, was him telling me about that debut.
Richard obviously caught the attention of a lot of people even before his debut. He was called up among some other guys in September as a September call-up, like what happens a lot. He made his debut in the second game of a doubleheader at Candlestick Park in San Francisco. And in that game, he struck out 15 Giants. That includes striking out Jim Ray Hart twice and striking out Willie Mays 3 times. After the game, Willie Mays said he would never play against J.R. Richard again. That's how dominant he was in that game. That's a ballpark like Candlestick Park. It's tough on hitters because it can be hard for them to hit a ball hard in the cold like that. And that's also the same place where Larry Dierker he got his last win of the season in 1971, but it did not come easy. He only pitched 5 innings to qualify for the win, but that was the game. His elbow trouble, which had really been minor up to that point, it really became severe, and it just really started hurting him, and that's what cost him the possibility of possibly being able to start the All-Star game. Was that game in San Francisco, his elbow just really couldn't take much anymore. And so for Richard to come make his first start in the big leagues, his big league debut, and do that well against the Giants, who won the National League West Division in 1971. I mean, that's a big deal, and he did win a few more games through the rest of the season. But that first game, that's just, especially looking back, easily a telltale sign of things to come for the Astros.
His second start, not too bad, although he gave up his first home run. Some scrub named Pete Rose hit a home run off of him. A few days later, Samuel, Robin Yount's brother, was set to make his major league pitching debut, but something really weird happened. Tell that story.
The 9th inning of a game against the Braves in the Astrodome, Larry Yount was called on to make his big league debut in relief. And he was warming up, just as pitchers do between innings, and his arm tightened up a little bit. It was to the point where they decided, okay, we're going to take you out, and we're going to bring in another pitcher. However, since his name had been announced by the PA announcer and it had been written down in scorecards, that counted as an appearance. So Larry Yount had been credited with his first appearance. He actually never got called into another big league game. He is the first and only pitcher in big league history to record one appearance, but no other statistics. So being recorded as having been in a game without throwing a single pitch. Of course, you compare that with his brother, I think younger brother, Robin Yount, who went on to have a Hall of Fame career with the Milwaukee Brewers. Definitely a fascinating story. I've heard some people mention that, and the big league debut of J.R. Richard are kind of the big 2 stories I hear about when it comes to the 1971 Astros.
The Astros finished 4th in the division. Their record 79-83. We talked about how disappointing it was. And just, in a couple of words, like, why don't you think this team lived up to their expectations? We talked about Harry Walker, but, can you narrow it down a little bit to why you think it just never happened for that team, despite, you said, the chemistry that they had with each other?
The easy answer is the general manager, Spec Richardson. I don't like talking down about Spec Richardson too much because he was from and made his baseball debut as a concession salesman and then lived out the rest of his days and died in Columbus, Georgia, which is 10 minutes from where I live in Phoenix City, Alabama. I've even been to his grave, the ballpark, Golden Park, where he was general manager as a minor league executive. It's still standing. It's been renovated a bunch because we got a minor league team back this year. But he was the big cause. I mean, he's the one he was a business administrator. He wasn't really that much of a baseball guy. I mean, he certainly liked baseball. He certainly enjoyed it. But he was certainly in over his head. He's the one who made all those trades of Mike Cuellar, Rusty Stubb, and so on and so forth, eventually Joe Morgan and John Mayberry. I heard players say that he was just kind of an off-the-wall, kind of crazy guy. He wasn't very methodical about what it was that he did. His decisions cost the Astros probably a pennant, at least in the early 1970s.
Let's get back to him in just a second. But one of the anomalies of that season, the Astros set a Major League Baseball record by playing in 75 one-run games. This was actually Joe Morgan's last season in Houston before the trade to the Reds. He had a 757 OPS, 56 RBIs, and 40 steals. Morgan finished fourth in MVP the next 2 seasons. He finished fourth the next 2 seasons and top 4 in 4 of the next 5 years. Do you think, Samuel, he needed a change of scenery, or was it just getting out of the Astrodome that changed his career? Because his home road splits were 130 points worse in the Dome that year.
Well, I often hear some people say, well, Joe Morgan was a good player with the Astros, but he became a Hall of Fame player in Cincinnati. Or Joe Morgan wouldn't have been a Hall of Fame player had he stayed in Houston. I disagree. Because the reason people say that is because they think, well, Morgan got around better players in Cincinnati. He was around a more complete team. And he was. That's true. But if we're looking at the entire picture with the study of Spec Richardson, of Harry Walker, of the players that were traded away, the Astros could have had that core too and been the team that Joe Morgan needed to become a Hall of Fame player. And so I don't think it was necessarily a change of scenery that was needed, because Joe Morgan, he didn't like the fact that he'd been traded. According to his autobiography, he wasn't happy. He became happy, of course, very much so. But he wasn't happy to begin with, especially him leaving Jimmy Wynn, because Jimmy Wynn wasn't happy about it either. And they said that they were the closest friends they each had in their baseball careers. As far as Joe Morgan goes, if everything else around him had taken shape properly, then we'd still be talking about him the same way we are now.
Let's listen back to Tal Smith, because he shared with us a little bit about GM Spec Richardson and what he had to say about Spec trading Joe Morgan.
I don't think he was a very, very good evaluator or recognizer of talent. I remember I was just shocked at the Morgan trade, and I can recall Joe Heiling was the beat writer for the Houston Post at that time, and the trade, as I recall, we were in Scottsdale, Arizona for meetings, Major League Baseball meetings. When word came to me that we had traded Morgan, I mean, I supposedly at that time was director of player personnel, but Spec did not choose to tell me about this or advise me about it. And when I found out about it, I was incensed and probably made some comments I shouldn't have. I remember telling Joe Heiling, who was standing there, and Joe said, "What do you think?" And I said, "I'm just devastated." I said, "Morgan's going to become an MVP." And sure enough, it was just a couple of years later, he won MVP honors back-to-back. And when I saw Spec a few minutes after the trade was announced, and I said, well, you may as well trade Mayberry now, because obviously the Morgan trade to Cincinnati, we got back Lee May, a first baseman, Tommy Helms, a second baseman, and Jimmy Stewart, a utility player. And I said, you may as well trade Mayberry, because I thought John was ready. His path was blocked now by May, and so that was one thing Spec did follow through on. He traded Mayberry, but I was just devastated by that.
Good stuff from Tal Smith. That whole interview, like I said, available on the YouTube channel. Go look for that. But got to ask you, Samuel, what other what ifs are there from that era of Astros baseball? I know you've got a laundry list in the book, but hit with the biggies from there.
Well, obviously, the big one being just what could have been with the win-loss record and the postseason achievements. There's the about Larry Dierker, what kind of career he would have had, because he had his career season in 1969. In 1971, he was on his way to replicating that, because through the first week of June in 1971, he had a 10-1 record with a 1.59 ERA. That was tops in baseball among both leagues. That's better than Mickey Lolich, better than Vida Blue, better than Tom Seaver, better than Fergie Jenkins, better than Dave Roberts, all guys that were prominent pitchers in baseball in 1971. Had he been able to keep that up, at that point, I think it's almost a shoo-in that he would have started the All-Star game, because there were rumors of that at the time. And then I think the 1.59 ERA would be an Astros single-season franchise record today. So would the 25 wins that pitching coach Jim Owens projected him to win. Obviously going from 1971 forward, if he just didn't have the elbow pain that turned into shoulder pain, I think there's a potential Cooperstown conversation there. I've heard that some people think if Doug Rader, as I mentioned earlier, had he had more of a contact hitting ability, there's a borderline Hall of Fame case there. A lot of people say there's already a borderline Hall of Fame case for Jimmy Wynn. If you have better 1971 season with him that lifts his numbers up a little bit. There's no telling. So there's a lot of individual as well as team what ifs with this era of Astros history as well. And they're just not talked about a lot because people think, well, the Astros just weren't that good until 1980. So they just kind of brush through the period from between the time the Astrodome opened and 1980. They just think there's not a lot there. And there easily could have been, very easily.
You mentioned earlier that you played out a potential postseason matchup with some of the teams the Astros could have faced. Willie Stargell and Roberto Clemente's Pirates would have been the NLCS if they get to that point. If you're watching and listening, you got to check out Samuel's entire scenario. I don't want to give too much away. We'll let you hang there on that. But I wanted to ask you, Samuel, how difficult was it, or explain what it takes to kind of get this to play out in AI, I guess, as far as the scenarios are concerned, because you actually had game by game by game.
So basically, I went to a website called whatifsports.com, and my book's comp title, which I based it off of the book The Forgotten 1970 Chicago Cubs Go and Glow by William Bike. I would encourage people to check that one out too. So whatifsports.com, it's a website that says it is what it says, what if sports. And you can kind of take two rosters or two teams from different seasons and pit them against each other. Just press play, and in a few seconds, it'll generate a box score, a line score, and a play-by-play. And so I took the 1971 Pittsburgh Pirates, and then as well as I created the roster that could have been with this Astros team, and I played them in a best-of-5 National League Championship Series to get what could have been the outcome there. And so it really wasn't that difficult because the computer, and what's good about it, if anybody's too concerned about AI or anything like that, I don't believe it's actually an AI website. I think there's some other algorithm with it, because I think it's been around longer than AI has been prominent. But just a matter of putting the lineups together, make sure I have the right starting pitchers, and make sure the lineups, if there's proper righty-lefty matchups, making sure that those are in there. That was a lot of fun. That might have been my favorite part of writing the book itself, was just seeing, what could have happened, and, putting it in there, seeing what the results could have been. Because, again, when I've talked about a lot of people who are fans of the Astros, they say, oh, I wonder how much better the team would have been if this guy, that guy been on the team. And then they just leave it at there. I wanted to know more, really how much better, or what could have happened. That's how I looked into it. That's how I did the research.
That's great. And if you look at the 71 team, it's also just this crazy mix of triumph and tragedy. With triumph, you got Joe Morgan, Dennis Menke, Jesus Alou, Cesar Geronimo, Darryl Thomas, Jack Billingham, Coach Hub Kittle, and Bob Watson. I mentioned all those guys because they all end up going on to win championship. Watson as a GM for the 90s Yankees dynasty, but the other guys as players, they got World Series championships. With tragedy, or what could have been, so I guess you could say, you got Scipio Spinks, who we talked to just a few months ago, Larry Yount that we mentioned, J.R. Richard, everybody knows that story, and the ultimate tragedy of Don Wilson. What sticks with you the most from telling this entire story, Samuel?
Kind of the enjoyment that I had with the research itself, and being able to listen to some of the former players, as well as Tal Smith, who I got to talk to myself, listen to them retell a lot of their memories from this era about what happened, and then me thinking about how things could have been a little differently, and some of the guys having opinions with that too. And again, the things that stick out with me the most are the things that you can't just find anywhere. You really have to hear people talk about, with even George Culver talking about there being a doubleheader in San Diego, the second to last series of the season in 1971, where the first game went 21 innings, and then the second game was delayed by fog twice. And so some of the pitchers were actually taking some of the beers out of the coach's office. And so when they realized after the second fog delay, because they thought they were going to play again, but then when they realized they're like, oh, shoot. So they took some of the beers, just put it in the ball bag. They took it out to the bullpen with them. You're not going to get that out of a box score. There's other stories. George Culver just released a book, too, last year called The Earl of Oildale, Why Me? I read that one. I would encourage people to check that one out, too, if they're interested, because he pitched for 6 different teams. So just getting to hear these stories and going not just looking at the analytical. The what if is one part of this, but there's also the storybook of a season that isn't often talked about. That's where you get the funny stories from that people always enjoy hearing about. So that's one of the big takeaways that I had.
Not just this Astros book, you've also wrote about your umpire journey, umpire diary, my personal journey and experiences beginning an umpire career. Tell us about that one. And are you still an umpire today?
This year was my 5th year calling baseball, mainly high school baseball here in Alabama. I began my umpire career by attending the premier umpire school in the world, the Wynn Umpire School, in 2021, that January. And I did well enough that I got a summer college job out of there. There were no minor league baseball jobs available that year because this is coming off of 2020 where there was no minor league season, so there was no turnover. But I got this summer college job, and it took me to a league called the Expedition League, which does not exist anymore for a lot of management reasons, actually similar to Spec Richardson in a way, now that I think about it. Yeah, in that they just weren't really baseball people running the league. And then I went the following year, January 2022, back to the Wynn Umpire School, and didn't get a job out of there that time. There were minor league jobs this time, and I didn't get one of them. But I've still caught high school ball, still caught some summer college ball, and every year except for my first, I've gotten postseason games in the Alabama High School Athletic Association. I enjoy doing that. A lot of teams, they just get games with umpires, with guys that are old or they're retired or they're doing something on the side. So when they see somebody young and refreshed and who's taking a lot of pride in what he's doing, I imagine it refreshes a lot of them. And some of the players who aren't much younger than I am, it's gotten to the point a lot of them just know me by name. So they just greet me when I get there to the field, and I give them a good game, and I've gotten a lot of respect for it. And so I'm glad about that, and I'll keep doing it. I actually I'm thinking I may go back to the umpire school one more time this upcoming January, because this upcoming January is going to be the final class of the traditional Wynn Umpire School. After that, Major League Baseball's taking over umpire development. And so I may go one more time and really give it my best shot and try to get into minor league baseball. And we'll see how that works, but I'm thinking I might try to do that.
Love your passion for baseball, and thanks so much for bringing a forgotten Astros era to light, Samuel. Where can we find your books?
You can find the book on HuntsvilleIndependent.com. That's the website of Huntsville Independent Press, based out of Huntsville, Alabama, the publisher of the book. Let's see, there's paperback available there. Hardcovers are coming soon. We're just working on getting those loaded there. If people like third parties, they can go Amazon, they can go some other bookstore websites. Or even, I don't know if people could scan that QR code to get to the Huntsville Independent website. These are some of the bookmarks I had printed up that I gave to some people when I was in Houston a couple of months ago. But I would mainly say HuntsvilleIndependent.com and Amazon are probably the two primary ways that you can find it. And if you ever run into me in person or something like that, and I happen to have my markers with me, not only might I sign it, but I might give you the option of orange or navy blue, because I always like to give people that option. I have orange and navy blue Sharpies, so I like to give people that option.
It's Orange Crush, the neglected 1971 Houston Astros. Before we go, I just want to thank our friends at FanDuel, FanDuel.com, the place to go, the FanDuel website, and you got the FanDuel app to go to check everything that you want to do over there. And thank you again, Samuel, for the time and sharing the stories with us about the 71 Astros.
I appreciate it. Good to be here. Thank you very much.
You're listening to Houston Sports Talk.
Hey, don't forget to support us by subscribing and commenting on YouTube. You can always listen to us on Spotify, Apple, or your favorite podcast app. Tell your friends about us and share our show links on social media. Spread the word, everybody. Thanks for listening.